let's talk about Rick and Morty Season 6 and titles. Because no, IGN, Avengers Endgame isn't the most relevant intertext for understanding this episode. That would be Solaris, specifically Andrei Tarkovsky's 1972 film, not the novel or the later American version. In this video, we'll be using this film to approach Rick and Morty's Season 6 premiere, to analyze it, to get right in there, intellectually speaking. The result, hopefully, will be a deeper understanding of this episode, and perhaps even for Season 6's broader direction heading forward. So spoilers ahead, both for a 50-year-old Soviet film and for the new Rick and Morty episode Solaricks. Which, yeah, let's talk about that title. Rick and Morty has a thing about titles. A lot of the time, and increasingly as the show's gone on, the folks behind the show don't like to title their episodes in a normal way, a way that'd be, helpful to someone trying to remember which episode is which. No, they're often puns on other pieces of pop culture, with Rick or Morty jammed haphazardly in there. Ricksty minutes instead of 60 minutes, Mortyplicity for multiplicity, and so on. Most of the time, these aren't random, so an episode like Total Recall is named for Total Recall because both center on seemingly false memories bleeding into reality. The degree to which these references fit their episodes varies. With some, like Mort Dinner Rick Andre or Rickternal Friendship of the Spotless Mort, it's pretty easy to spot the links they're going for. Sometimes it's a little bit more arbitrary. Claw and Hoarder Special Ricktims Morty has very little to do with SVU, for instance, but often the text being referred to can shine a light on the Rick and Morty episode making the reference. Take an episode like Mortynight Run. That's the Fart, Roy, Crumbopulous, Michael one. This obviously is a riff on Midnight Run. It makes sense superficially, both are playing with road trip buddy comedy tropes, but it also fits on a deeper level. Midnight Run's writer George Gallo had this to say about one of the film's central dynamics. Both men realize, despite their differences, that they share core beliefs of what is right and wrong. Flip back to Rick and Morty, and equally the center of Mortynight Run isn't so much the road trip as it is the moral dilemmas and disagreements the road trip brings up. Until at the end, Morty realizes that his values aren't so different from his granddad's when push comes to shove.
You said yourself that life must be protected even through sacrifice. You haven't changed your mind about that. I can sense your thoughts. Morty.
So considering these allusions can be useful in understanding Rick and Morty. This time with Solaricks, the link isn't quite so obvious. You might think that, hey, traveling to a disused space station, that's the basic premise of Solaris, and I guess that's kind of what Summer and the Beths do, but that connection is superficial in the extreme. No, there's something far weightier here, something beyond that basic premise, but before we get into it properly, we need to talk a little about Tarkovsky's film. So, for the uninitiated, what is Solaris about? Tarkovsky's Solaris is one of the unquestionable classics of science fiction cinema. On a basic level, it's about a psychologist, Chris Kelvin, sent from Earth to investigate strange happenings on a space station orbiting the planet Solaris. The station was a scientific outpost, but recently their transmissions back to Earth have become garbled and confused. It's Kelvin's job to figure out what's happened to the station's small crew, and to their mission. It turns out that Solaris is living somehow, and just as the cosmonauts had been probing Solaris using radiation, so too had Solaris probed the cosmonauts, using some sort of psychic neutrino energy. The result of this probing is the appearance of so-called visitors. The cosmonauts' memories come to life. People from their past physically appear, but different, unkillable. Kelvin's late wife Harry is one of these. Despite having died a decade earlier, she's back. Or is she? Because the rest of Solaris doesn't go the route you might expect. It doesn't find the cosmonauts banding together to defend the station and destroy the living planet or anything else so cliché. No, Solaris is far more interested in the above question. Is this Harry? Is she real? Is she human? She's not the true original Harry. She's constructed purely from Kelvin's memory, his understanding of his late wife, because that's all the data Solaris had access to. So in a sense, what we're seeing here is just Kelvin struggling with his own mind, his conscience, the baggage of his wife's passing, of the role he may have played in it. But from a certain point of view, even on Earth, we can't ever truly see or interact with each other, only our ideas of each other. So is this really different? Is Kelvin's bond with this new Harry real, meaningful? Stanislav Lem's book, the text this film adapted, was more ontological, digging into this this impossibility of true communication, the uncrossable gulf between the subject and the other. But Tarkovsky turned away from this focus, turned inward.
Нам не нужно других миров. Нам нужно зеркало.
Tarkovsky saw Western attempts at sci-fi cinema as shallow and simplistic, too concerned about technology and spectacle. Accordingly, Solaris isn't too bothered with scientific or cosmic questions about the future of humanity. Rather, it's interested in human psychology, and not some imagined future human psychology either. Despite the space stations, the interstellar travel, the humanity we see in Solaris is humanity. It's you, it's me. As the director said himself, what happened on the space station is simply a question of a person's relationship with his own conscience. The trick of Solaris, then, is how it uses a sci-fi premise to unite its characters with the ghosts of their past, to delve into the baggage these spectres represent, and to evaluate the relationship between reality, perspective, and meaning. And that's exactly what we see in Solaricks. As Bleeding Cool's review of the episode notes, we're seeing Rick and Morty at their lowest, being forced to revisit their pasts, and confront some of what they've done if they have any chance of moving forward. So it's kind of the same deal, but the visitors here aren't projections from Solaris. No, they take a few different forms. First and foremost, there's the literal original versions of beloved characters who our multiversally displaced main cast come into contact with. But it doesn't end there.
Remember? You thought if you could see or touch me, it might give you a level of comfort.
Right, can't have that.
Some of these visions are more artificial than others. The Diane bot, compared to Season 1 Jerry, for instance. The confrontation with Killer Rick, Prime Rick, whatever you want to call him, even self-consciously flirts with the question, how real are any of these encounters?
There's the clone you found, or maybe it's me all naked. Just a little Kaiser Sose. I mean, why would I admit it's not? Oh yeah, look at him go!
But these are all ghosts of the past, and they're all real to our characters. Take Rick and Diane. He isn't literally haunted by the spirit of his dead wife, it's some sort of AI. But he might as well be, because he is clearly haunted by her memory. The plot device which narratively facilitates this conceit isn't a sentient planet, as in Solaris. No, here it's the whole portal reset thing we get in the first act. But just like with Solaris, it works. As we watch our characters interact with these figures they once knew, we gain insight into their minds, their psychologies, and how they've grown or haven't grown since the last time they'd been with these ghosts. And it isn't just me that thinks so. IndieWire's review of the episode notes that to Rick's nihilistic, vengeance-addled past self, having a wife ghost lurking around his workspace probably seemed like a neat party trick he could amuse himself with. To the Rick who's had years worth of time to reflect on a family he stumbled into, haunting means something else entirely. That evolution isn't nothing. So Solaris might give us the key to understanding how Rick and Morty wants us to view these encounters, these blasts from the past in the Season 6 premiere, but there's another equally important aspect of this illusion which we've not yet broached, and that's visible in the ending. After Mr. Frundles, who by the way is my favourite cute little guy since Babu Frick, goes Frundle mode on the Smiths' current homeworld, the gang packs up and dimension hops to the Parmesian universe. Geez, that sentence must make no sense to you if you haven't seen this episode, huh? They get there, bury that world's family, and ask Rick about this dimension. And this is the part of the script where in a previous season, Morty, Jerry, or maybe even Beth would have had a little freak out about the fact that really, they'd just left behind everyone and everything they'd ever known, and that this was objectively an alien world and life they'd slotted themselves into. But at this point, no one's really bothered by it. To reveal the significance of this, let's flip back to Solaris one last time. The film ends with Kelvin returning to Earth after a bit of chaos on the station. He returns to his father's house where the film opened, but then we pull back to reveal he's on Solaris. And the homestead and his family are all artificial constructs, made by the planet from his memories. It isn't really his home, but this scene's not an ominous one. There's a sense of peace and acceptance here. This isn't his real Earth, but he's chosen it. In the words of the website Little White Lies, what is simulated and what is real are, in Tarkovsky's eyes, identical. As long as we believe something exists, everything else is lost in the ether. The end of the Rick and Morty episode clearly parallels the film then, with the Smiths choosing a new, identical home that is somehow artificial, a facsimile of their true world, and embracing it. They're fine with the dimension hop, they're fine with living in an objectively alien world, they're fine with the revelation that this is nobody's original Jerry, because by the end of Solaricks, everyone's united in believing that none of this matters so long as they're there together, as a family. Maybe that is a fiction, at least partially, but that doesn't matter because they choose to believe in it. And so long as they believe their life as a family continues to exist, then it does. It doesn't matter who's from what dimension, who's a clone, and so on. None of these things, which have been distressing our characters for years now, matter in the slightest. Family's always been at the center of Rick and Morty, and I think ending the Season 6 premiere in this way is one of the biggest affirmations of this, of love, of meaning over nihilism that we've seen in the show to date. And I think now that the show's done this, it'll probably stop going to that dramatic well. I don't see Season 6 going heavy on the whole angsty cosmic insignificance angle, because Solaricks, partially via Solaris, has provided a pretty compelling conclusion to this long-running side of the show. So that's what we get from reading the new Rick and Morty episode through a Soviet sci-fi film made half a century ago, and I think that's pretty neat. Of course, there's plenty of other stuff to like in this new episode that's totally original, not at all tied to Solaris. The whole Season 2 universe bit, for instance, was a really fun way of integrating commentary on character shifts and writing changes into the diegesis of the show. Rick and Morty's always been meta, and it's nice to see them continuing to play with that missing fourth wall in new ways. But I hope you've appreciated this video's angle nonetheless. I do have some older videos on Rick and Morty, but bear in mind they're from just after I started this whole YouTube lark, so production quality on them varies. The playlist should be on screen in just a second though, so give them a look if you're curious. And in case any of you guys missed the community post, I made a special appearance on TSD Talk's new video talking about Disney Star Wars, so give that a look if you want to hear my thoughts on Solo, a Star Wars story, and TSDs on the rest of the franchise. Drop a like if you're cool, follow me on Twitter, and as always, I'd like to thank all my patrons on screen now, particularly Kevin Douglas and Ian Fifield.